Hello again, and welcome back to the Press Rewind Prince Lyrics podcast. I'm your host, Jason Brenninger, and today we are going to be talking about Sexuality. This is a very interesting song off of Prince's Controversy album that comes across as one way to the casual listener or somebody who isn't really paying attention, but there's a lot going on in this song, and I felt like it was important for me to add a guest for this episode, and I asked Erica Thompson if she could join me on an episode, and she picked Sexuality, and it totally makes sense based on what she writes about in her own personal blog, which is A Purple Day in December, and I will let Erica talk a little bit about that here in a second. But I just wanted to thank everybody who's been with me on this journey so far through Prince's catalog. We've covered everything off of For You, Prince, and Dirty Mind. We're working through the Controversy album, and hopefully everybody's enjoying what you've been listening to thus far, and got a long ways to go, let's just put it that way, but I'm enjoying it. Hopefully you are too. So I just wanted to thank everybody again for your feedback and for listening. So I wanted to welcome Erica Thompson to the show. Hi, Erica.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I'm happy to have you on the show for the very first time. So Erica has joined us to talk about Sexuality, which is the second track on Prince's Controversy album. But before we get started talking about Sexuality, since you're new to the show, Erica, would you mind giving the listeners a brief bio about yourself and let everyone know what you're up to and maybe how to get a hold of you and check out what you're doing Prince-related?
Sure. So I'm Erica, and I am a journalist in Ohio. I work for an alt-weekly publication, and I freelance for a couple others. But I'm also working on a book on Prince's spiritual journey. I have been for almost 10 years now. And I'm basically tracing his journey from birth to his passing and the many phases that he went through. And so you can learn about that at apurpledayindecember.com, where I also write blogs and do interviews, sometimes outside of the realm of spirituality, but spirituality is my main focus.
Great. Yeah, I've definitely checked out your writings, and I enjoy what you do, so I'm happy to have you here. Talk about Prince.
Thank you.
So Sexuality is the song that we're talking about, and while you have a very heavy focus on your writings with Prince and spirituality, this is going to be an interesting conversation, and I think it's a great one for you to join us on, because there's obviously some parallels that can be made between sexuality and spirituality, and Prince has been making those parallels for the vast majority of his career, especially early on. And obviously with a song off of Controversy, just 4 years into his career, this is an early example of where he does this, and I have a feeling that you will have some unique and probably insightful discussions on this topic as we go through the lyrics of Sexuality. Would you agree?
Yeah, I do. Hopefully they're not too weird, but I mean, Prince is a master at mixing sexuality and spirituality, and you really can't talk about one without talking about the other, for sure.
Yeah, and, the weirder the better as far as I'm concerned. So, let's bring it on. I have no problem getting weird. So, Sexuality was never released as a single in the United States, although I believe it was released as a single. It was released in a couple of European countries, Germany and Austria. And there was a music video recorded for this song. It wasn't a video that ever received any kind of airplay on MTV. Even if it would have been released in the United States at that time, it was probably unlikely to be receiving or would have received MTV airplay, just due to, Prince being a black artist, and they weren't really playing videos from black artists at that time. So you might have had to catch it on a different avenue. But when the Prince estate started releasing those music videos a year or two ago, and it was the first time I had ever seen this music video. I don't know if you'd ever caught it before, Erica.
No, I think I'm right with you there. I wasn't familiar with it before they started releasing them.
Yeah, so it's kind of cool that it exists, and there was still stuff out there for us to check out. But and the thing that's striking about this song is the way it starts. You've got that amazing Prince scream. I mean, you can't talk about Sexuality, the song, without mentioning how Prince starts it off screaming, and not just once, not just twice. And each one of those screams gets more, I guess, orgasmic in sound. Like the first one's very kind of brief, and then towards the very end, he adds a little inflection to it, and then it echoes off. And that's how the song starts. So right off the bat, you're getting, a very unique sound and something that is extremely striking and giving you a sense for where this song might lead. And for me, that's it. The screams at the beginning of Sexuality are super important to kind of setting the tone for the song.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like someone has ranked his screams somewhere online. I'll have to Google that, but I guess I have to spend some time thinking about how I would rank it. But yeah, it's just when it comes on like that, you don't know what you're about to get. And I really wish I could go back in my memory of the first time hearing this song to know how I reacted to it, but I can't. But yeah, it definitely sets the tone for sure.
Yeah, that sounds like something Prince's Friends YouTube channel has done.
Exactly.
I feel like I've seen it on there before. I could be wrong. Yeah, but the video's cool. It's just another performance video. He has a lot of those, during the Dirty Mind through 1999 era. Well, even, before that, the Prince album has a couple of performance videos as well, and that was just what he did. And so for me, I'm looking at this song. I'm not immediately making a connection between sexuality and spirituality. It's something that I think you have to kind of come to it gradually. And if you're not well versed in Prince's later career, the music he made later on in his career, it may not be a connection that one would make or that you would make. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're sure, I thought that he maybe changed the title. If he performed this song live later on in his career, like in the 2000s, I thought that I read somewhere that he changed it to Spirituality.
You are correct. Yeah, it was during the Las Vegas residency that ran from 2006 to 2007. He changed it to Spirituality.
Wow, okay. Yeah, so I mean, he didn't think the song was worth discarding. Like, he must have thought the song had some value many decades later, but then just the fact that he made that switch just kind of tells us what we wanted to come to that conclusion in our heads. Like somewhere in the 90s where that switch happened, I'm sure this was probably a song that, along with some of his other more risque earlier tracks that he probably had no interest in playing again, but then something came to him and oh, well, I could just change the lyrics to this and it's still, everything else still totally fits. Many lines in the song where looking at it in a 2019 lens, and a lot of the lyrics still apply today, and that's a pretty cool thing to discover when you're looking at a nearly 40-year-old song.
Yeah, and I would actually argue that, the spirituality is buried here as well. And if you think about the controversy period as a whole, that's where he really starts to introduce some heavy Christian imagery. We all know the Lord's Prayer is in the title track, and then if you look at the cover of the controversy album, you'll see all the headlines like "Love Thy Neighbor" and things like that. And of course, we know about anti-Christian, but then you get into the videos and on the controversy tour where he has crosses and stained glass windows. So it's all there. And my argument is that Prince had been crafting this spiritual philosophy based on sex prior to this. Like if you think about Dirty Mind, and that is to say, in my opinion, he's saying that sexual freedom can liberate individuals and therefore society and stop war. And then you can achieve this utopian state. So if you look at songs like Party Up and Uptown, in my opinion, that's the message that he's trying to get across. And I think it's the same message here with Sexuality, where he's saying sexuality is all you'll ever need. Let your body be free. We're entering a new age revelation and going to another world. But the difference here is that he's adding this Christian imagery in it. So in the first part of the song, you hear about the second coming. And, that's a really major concept in Christianity, talking about the coming of Jesus Christ to judge mankind and deliver the righteous. So that's really what makes this song and this whole era like really intriguing.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And the Christian imagery that you bring up is it hadn't been there before. We really hadn't seen this in Prince's music or any of his visuals up to this point. And it's not just in a little bit in this album, like you mentioned. So you cited several examples where it's there, and this is just all on one album, and then it continues on throughout his career. But this is the first real examples of that, and it's not, like you said, not just one. There's several of them. And so if we start going through the first verse of the song, he kicks it off by saying, after the screams and you get the music, he goes, "Stand up, everybody, this is your life. Let me take you to another world, let me take you tonight. You don't need no money, you don't need no clothes. The second coming, anything goes." So the way he sings this very first verse, it almost sounds to me like he's like an MC at like this, like you envision like at a circus or a fair, like trying to get people to come with him. And I just have, this visual might be a little out there, but I just have this image of Prince as like this huckster, this MC trying to get people, come on everybody, this is your life. Leave all these material possessions behind. You don't need money, you don't need clothes. Come with me and you'll experience something you never experienced before. And I just get this, I don't want to say, I don't want to get too religious with this particular imagery, so that I used the circus example of an MC trying to get people that are walking, on the street to come into our circus tent and check out what we've got going on here. What kind of imagery do you get and see from this first verse?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great image that you just presented there. I think that fits. I mean, you said you didn't want to get too religious. I mean, you can think of him as like a pastor or a minister, and I think some journalists even like called him a freak in the pulpit. I feel like in one of the early articles on him. So it's he's definitely presenting himself as a leader, and we even have that in the song later when he's talking about a new breed and he wants to be a part of the new breed. So he's definitely he wants people to follow him there, as you said.
Right. I mean, you could, since we're going to go there, I guess you could say you could even think of him like in a almost like you said pastor, but almost like a Jesus Christ type imagery with this, like, come join me. I need my 12 apostles. I need we need people to follow me, because he's going to lead the people to, like you said, this utopian society through sex.
Yeah.
And so then he goes right into the chorus after that. Sexuality is all you'll ever need. Sexuality, let your body be free. And, he keeps the chorus really simple. And you're thinking, maybe if you're listening to this and you're thinking of the lyrics, let your body be free, maybe free from what? Free from just any kind of societal norms, free from any Christian ideals about what sexuality means, and just like the historical meaning of what Christianity was, and kind of taking a different approach towards it. And what does that mean? Let your body be free. I guess that depends on who's listening and who it is that is taking that message. I suppose we all have probably our own shackles and chains that are keeping us in some sort of bondage, not physical, but you know what I mean, metaphorical.
Yeah, and free to pursue your desires. And later in the song he says, he talks about the double drags who teach their kids that love is bad. I mean, you can interpret that physical pleasure is taught that that is bad. And then later when he talks about if the kids are watching TV and not reading, they'll only know how to breed, and you could read that as like they'll only know how to procreate, but not like enjoy the pleasures of sex too.
Oh yeah, good point. Good point. So yeah, that is the chorus, and he never repeats that chorus exactly how it's done right there at the very beginning, but he does repeat the line "Sexuality is all you'll ever need," as that is really kind of the driving home point of the song. The next verse, "Come on everybody, yeah, this is your life. I'm talking about a revolution. We got to organize. We don't need no segregation. We don't need no race. New age revelation. I think we got a case." And this is the second time, in back-to-back songs on the album where he makes that comment about race and wishing there was no race. And in some cases he says, well, in Controversy he says he wishes there was no black and white. And here he says we don't need no race. And as I mentioned in the Controversy episode, what I feel like he's trying to say is like all these things that divide us, we don't need it. Let's get rid of all of the things that keep us from being together. And if that means that we have to wipe away all these preconceived notions of who we are because of race or because of religion or because of sexuality, let's get rid of that. We don't need any of that bullshit, basically. And of course, we don't need no segregation. I feel like, he's just basically saying that we shouldn't be separated as human beings. We're all human beings. So let's come together in this sexual revolution, and anybody can join us.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then I also want to say, because I think, like you mentioned in some of these songs around this era, a lot of people like go a step further and read it as he's transcending race. And, that's not my interpretation of that. He's definitely calling for equality, but I think we have to think about his place in the music industry as a black man. It was very segregated and very racist at that time. And also growing up in Minneapolis, where he faced segregation, and during the civil rights movement, we hear him talk about that later in songs like The Sacrifice of Victor. So, Prince was very much still centered as a black man, but at the same time, he does want to be treated equally.
Yeah, for sure. He wanted to be treated equally, and that was why he very early on was like, I don't want you to the record company, to Warner Brothers, don't make me black. That was his quote. And it wasn't like, I don't want to be a black man. He's telling them, don't just play me on black stations. Don't just market me to black audiences. I want to be able to reach as many people as I can, and if you do that, because of the radio being segregated and because of early MTV being segregated, he knew that if he was just marketed as a black artist, he was never going to get that reach, and that was obviously a legitimate concern for him. And so, like in songs like Controversy and here, where he's talking about we don't wish there was no black and white, or we don't need no race, I really feel like it's more just we need to, or he wants it to be equal. He wants everybody to be equal because he's not seeing that in his day to day, and he's not seeing that in the music industry. And so it's frustrating for him, and this is where he feels we as a society need to go.
Yep, exactly.
So then he goes into the next chorus, which is very similar to the first chorus, but he says, instead of let your body be free, he says, I'm okay as long as you are here with me. Then he goes, sexuality is all we ever need. So he repeats the sexuality is all we ever need. As I mentioned, that's kind of like the summary line. That's, if you had to succinctly state what the song is all about in one line, that would be probably the closest you could find. But then with the I'm okay as long as you are here with me, that's the kind of the first time he mentions anything about anybody else. Because I feel like whenever he says this is your life and let me take you tonight, I feel like he's not talking to anybody specifically. But I guess he could be talking to a broader audience when he says I'm okay as long as you are here with me, not you person, but you as the greater you, like all of you. And so that might be one way of interpreting that chorus. As long as he's got people with him, as long as he has people joining him on this journey, he'll be okay, I guess is maybe how I interpret that line.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page with you, but that's the cool thing about Prince is there are so many different layers and interpretations. But yeah, I agree with you. It's like galvanizing people and, come along with me.
Yeah, because he mentions everybody early on, so you kind of implies that there's multiple people being included in, the subjects of the song, but then all of a sudden, I'm okay as long as you are here with me. That's usually something you say to a person, not a greater group of people, but you certainly can be interpreted that way. Okay, so then we get to this hook where he repeats this phrase over and over again, just to to hammer it home, and it's really quite an interesting phrase. Reproduction of a new breed. Leaders stand up, organize. And he repeats that over and over. Reproduction of a new breed. Leaders stand up, organize. So this one, this hook, and you know what? I'm going to ask you, Eric. What do you feel about this one? I have some notes on it myself, but I want to get your take on it first.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I just look at it, I don't go too deep into it, but I look at it as this is a new generation. This is a new worldview. This is a new way of thinking. We are entering into this new realm where we are going to be sexually free and we're going to break down all of our barriers and all of our differences. So it's a call to that, and I would imagine you're probably going to go there, but he uses the same chant in Rainbow Children later, and that is a very religious album. I mean, it's really couched in Jehovah's Witness doctrine, and the difference between sexuality and that is in sexuality, it's like, let's embrace the flesh, let's embrace our physical desires, whereas later when he does it in Rainbow Children, it's like, let's embrace God and let's embrace our higher selves. So it's really kind of cool how that comes back. But, back to sexuality, I think it's just a call for a different worldview.
Yeah, I actually wrote down call to action. It's a call to action. When somebody says stand up, organize, that's not a call to be passive. That's not saying, everybody get on your computers and, write a strongly worded essay. This is like, get up and get out there and make a difference, make a change. And so to organize, getting people with, like-minded individuals who can get out there and make a change. And I think he's, like he said, talking about his generation, talking about a generation of people. And later in the song, as we get to the next, like that spoken interlude, you notice that Prince seems to have like this disdain for the older generation, which is, not uncommon. Every younger generation has distrust and a bit of disdain for their elders. And he makes it very well known in this next grouping of lines. But I just get this feeling when I'm listening to the song and hearing the song, he's really just speaking to members of his own generation. He wants that generation to be more open to sexuality, more open to race, more open to gender, just whatever. Just be more open, be willing to explore and try new things, and quit falling in line with what was the societal norms of the forefathers and his parents' generation, because he doesn't feel like that's working or has worked.
Yeah, I think I've seen some scholars label this as one of Prince's protest songs, and I think you could certainly make that argument. I mean, even though a lot of it is about sexuality, but I mean, he mentioned segregation and race, so I think you could group this with his protest songs throughout the years.
Yeah, I mean, for a song that's labeled sexuality, and he talks about sexuality in the chorus, there's not a lot of sex going on in this song. There really isn't. The next track, Do Me Baby, is obviously significantly more sexual in nature than this song. That's called Sexuality. So, it's a bit of a misnomer when we're talking about a title and then, what's this song's going to be dirty, right? Well, not so much.
Right.
Not so much. All right, so the spoken interlude This part is just full of like quotable Prince lines. I mean, this is just jam packed with stuff you can quote, and kind of they're fun little phrases, but you got to think about it to figure out what he's talking about. And like I said, very quotable. So he says, "We live in a world overrun by tourists. Tourists, 89 flowers on their back, inventors of the AccuJack. They look at life through a pocket camera. What? No flash again? They're all a bunch of double drags who teach their kids that love is bad. Half of the staff of their brain is on vacation." I just can't get through. I mean, I'm going to stop there. I know there's another whole half of it left, but there's a lot going on in these lines here. So
Yeah.
we live in a world overrun by tourists, 89 flowers on their back. So that took me a while to figure, or at least come up with an image that I think works. When I was thinking about this line, I guess I was a kid in the 80s, and I had Hawaiian shirts, because Hawaiian shirts for a while there were the style, even though I had never been to Hawaii in my life, and I had never even seen the ocean. But yay, I was wearing a Hawaiian shirt because it was the style, or a style. And so I don't know. I'm guessing some sort of Hawaiian print. That's as good as I can get.
I think that does work. Sometimes I feel like you can't interpret some of what he's saying, like who really, really knows. But I think the concept of tourists here is, at least the way I was thinking about it is, the people with the old way of thinking are tourists in this new world and this new generation. Like they're not of this utopia that Prince is trying to get everybody on board with. So that's kind of how I took that. Yeah.
Yeah, living life through kind of a limited perspective by looking through their pocket cameras. Because, you have a very limited view through the view of a camera lens. So you could look at it that way. And then what I like about this, though, is this can be absolutely applicable to 2019, to today. They look at life through a pocket camera. So I think that you and I, we're both can have seen and experienced those situations where you see people just with their phones out, constantly recording everything. And I go to a lot of concerts, and I see a lot of people just recording, minutes and minutes and minutes, entire songs, multiple songs at a time through their camera, and they're looking through it. And I've tried doing that before with just 30 seconds or so of video, and I'm like, oh, you almost like you're watching the concert through your phone. And I wonder if that's like kind of what he's trying to get to with this, is like you're just looking through everything through a camera lens. It's almost like filtered in a way where you're not really experiencing the real event. You're filtering it through like a lens. And that's what I take out of that.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. And it's like I almost get chills thinking about how relevant it is to today. And I think that's what I appreciate that Prince did, like at his shows, like where he would ban cell phones or cameras, because he really wanted you. I mean, of course, he didn't want footage out there, but
Yeah.
he also wanted you to live in the moment. And that's, from all the interviews and things that we've heard, is kind of how he lived his life there in the moment. And I try to think about that myself when I'm at shows too, and not to do too much of that, because it is kind of disconcerting to look around and see all the phones.
Yeah, it's just a little different way of I mean, I don't know how old you are. I'm in my 40s now, so obviously I had most of my life without cell phones and without the easy access of being able to record things. And so while I enjoy and I really appreciate the abilities to do that, I also sometimes don't think of it. And like I'm not always thinking like, oh, I should be recording this, because it's just not something that is ingrained in my DNA, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I'm 34, and so I did have a moment there of when I didn't have all this either, and sometimes
Yeah.
I long for that for sure.
Yeah, you're like the last generation.
Yeah.
Everybody just a little bit younger than you has no idea what you're talking about.
Exactly.
I can't skip the inventors of the AccuJack line. So I mean, I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I mean, this is basically a male masturbation device. And so he's like, oh, inventors of this, self-pleasuring device, something that provides pleasure, but you don't need to actually interact with anybody in order to experience sexual gratification. And to Prince in this song, that's just like disdainful, like, ugh. That's not the point, right? That's not the point.
Even though he would later talk about playing his tambourine, but I guess that's another conversation.
You're right. That's a conversation for the song tambourine. But,
exactly.
Yeah, right. I mean, in a song about sexuality, I think in getting together and organizing, solo sexual adventures isn't really the point in his mind. So for him, this is kind of like a throwaway invention. Like, why do we need this? It's just another thing to keep us from interacting and being with each other.
Yeah.
The what no flash again? I mean, don't need to get too deep into that. It's just basically a nice, fun line for him to say, oh, your phones are malfunctioning. The things that you invent are backfiring on you. All these inventions, all this technology is backfiring and it's not working for you. And then you already mentioned a bunch of double drags who teach their kids that love is bad. You mentioned that earlier about, teaching kids, and what is the generation that Prince was railing against, basically teaching kids that love is bad and that, you're just going to set them in front of the television as their babysitter, like the latchkey kids and some of the, that's obviously not a new thing, and it still exists today, except now it's not of so much television as it is internet. But there's still like this fear that television or internet or not the parents themselves are raising the children. And so what is it that they're being raised on? They're being raised on, violence or cursing, and then sexual natures, things that are not of a loving manner, but more of just sex for sex sake, or not having there be any kind of connection, emotional connection to go along with the sex. And that's where he mentions all they'll know how to do is cuss, fight, and breed line.
Yeah, and you know what? I might have a slightly different interpretation, and it kind of took me a while because I think before I really, really sat down and thought about the song, I was like, well, if this song is all about sexuality, then, why does he care that the kids want to breed, right? But then I was like, no, it's deeper than that, because the way I read it is that, they're taught to just procreate and not really enjoy sex, and I may be like, even thinking along these lines even more so now because I'm watching The Handmaid's Tale right now. But that's kind of how I read it. It's just like very clinical, like, that this is what they learn how to do. But that's a very specific interpretation that I have, and I could be wrong because there are so many, but that's kind of how I'm taking it right now.
Yeah, no, and that's why I really enjoy having guests on the show, because to me there's no right or wrong. So to use the word breed, that is it has connotations to reproduction and not so much sex as it is the act of creating another life. And so, yeah, you're right. I mean, when you're thinking of it, or it makes sense when you say it that way, because breed is not a word that's typically used when you're just talking about casual sex or sex for enjoyment. It has more of a meaning towards, like I mentioned, procreation and having children. Kind of in line with what you had mentioned, it makes sense that way. Yeah. Don't let your children watch television until they know how to read. I like that line too. He's being very judgy. Being very judgy about how people raise their kids, but whatever. I mean, he's just basically saying what he feels is like, what is important for kids is that they need to have the ability to learn, and that's how one way, a very key way of learning is through reading. At least I believe that. And that's how I was raised. But then again, I'm getting old now too, so I'm sure that there's way more technologically advanced ways to learn that. Younger people will be like, oh, well, that's the old way. So I get it. But this is a song written in 1980, 1981. So we have to take it from that standpoint. And television was, kind of the evil at the time, with all cable television and advancing and all of these channels, and all of a sudden all these television shows were popping up that had never existed before, and all these stations were popping up that never existed before. And I think in the late 70s, early 80s, with the advances of cable television, was really kind of a time where people were thinking, boy, this television thing, this is getting a little out of hand. I mean, there's a lot going on here that we can't. I have no idea. Like, as a parent, I wouldn't know necessarily what was constantly on all 80 channels. And for me, as a parent now, I think the same. I think less of that as the television, but now I think of that on the internet. And so now I would just switch that up now. And these days, don't let your children on the internet until they know how to read.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's scary to think about. I mean, I have nieces, and yeah, I don't know how my sisters control that. But also, I do like, I mean, Prince was known to be an avid reader throughout his whole life, and like there are like lists of the books that he read floating around on the internet. So it's obviously something that was really important to him, and it's cool to see it mentioned, in his songs throughout his career too.
Yeah, Prince giving parenting advice at a very young age.
Yeah.
Got to listen to him. No child is bad from the beginning. They only imitate their atmosphere. If they're in the company of tourists, alcohol, and U.S. history, what's to be expected is 3 minus 3. Absolutely nothing. So no child is bad from the beginning is a good line because, that's something that I think just about anybody can agree with. I mean, who's really bad besides Damien from The Omen? In the general consensus is that children are, born very innocent and they only learn their behaviors from watching their people in their environment and watching what goes on in their environment. And so he's just kind of reiterating that point. They only imitate their atmosphere. They only imitate those who they see and who are raising them or, placed in their presence at a young age. What's to be expected is 3 minus 3. That's always a fun line, too, because that's just a really long, drawn-out way is to say nothing can be expected of these children that are raised in this way. You can't expect something to, like, a flower to grow out of the cement. Example of how he's explaining, child rearing and talking about how to raise a well-balanced, well-formed child. But you can't expect that if you're introducing them and putting them in an environment that isn't conducive to learning.
Like you said, the 3 minus 3, I mean, leave it to Prince. Prince comes up with like the craziest lines. I mean, they still make sense, but he just always has a funny way of saying it. Like if we back up a little bit, we didn't mention half of the staff of their brain is on vacation.
Oh yeah, forgot.
Right. So you can always count on him for some off the wall line, but we still know, what he's talking about.
Yeah, half of the staff of their brain is on vacation. Yeah, that's just a very interesting way to basically say that nothing's going on in their head.
Yeah.
He repeats the hook then, stand up, organize, reproduction of a new breed, leaders stand up, organize. And as the song kind of starts to fade out, he repeats the lines, sexuality is all you'll ever need. Sexuality, I'm going to let my body be free. So I'm kind of pointing out that he's talking about his own body now at this point. Sexuality is all I'll ever need. Sexuality, I'm going to let my body be free. So before he's talking about let your body be free, and then he finishes the song making sure that we hear him talking about it for himself as well. It's like it's his turn. He's going to let his body be free. If it's going to start with him, Prince is going to follow his own advice, so to speak.
Yeah, you kind of pointed that out through the whole song about how he changes it up. Like first it's sexuality is all you'll ever need, then it's sexuality is all we ever need, and then it's back to sexuality is all I'll ever need. And I think it's just really interesting that he, of course, paid enough attention to do that. And you could probably get into something with the Holy Trinity. I'm not going to go there. But it's really, it's real. I love how he changes it up like that for sure.
Yeah. It's just it's full circle, you know. You, me, we. It's all full circle. He wants to make sure that it's understood by the listener that he's talking about everybody, including himself. And if you can't figure that out from the lyrics, he'll reiterate it more than once because it's an important. I think for him, it's an important point to make for this particular song. So yeah, that's sexuality in a nutshell. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to dissect in this song. I mean, just even if you're like really not into listening to the lyrics, the song is great. I mean, it's a fun dance song. You can dance to it. But it's also, you can just sit down and just jam out to it. There's just a lot of stuff going on in this song musically as well, and the way he sings it. With the screams at the beginning, and then how he switches things up throughout with verse, chorus, verse, but then goes into this chanting hook and then has the spoken interlude with so many quotable lines in it. When he does the little interlude, I've got that memorized to the point now where even after watching the video, when he does the 3 minus 3, absolutely nothing, he has just those dramatic pauses in there that, you don't know what he's about to say, and it's like, oh, absolutely nothing. I just love the way he sings and speaks those lines in that last half of that song. And I think it's all very clear. It's very well understood. And that was always kind of like an early complaint. If I was going to have a complaint on some of Prince's earlier songs, is the way he sang them oftentimes was difficult to understand. It wasn't always super clear what he was saying, but to me, this song is pretty crystal clear. I mean, I can understand what he's saying throughout, and I think I don't know if that was by design, like he really wanted to make sure that there was no question what was being sung here, that the lyrics were very clear to the listener, or if it's just because he was in the voice he was singing and just happened to be that way. But I do appreciate that all the lyrics are very clear, because it's a song that you need to hear the lyrics, I think.
Yeah. And I think I want to say a couple other things about the song too regarding religion. And it's something that, I've kind of been working through in my own research. And, I talked about earlier, like the different interpretations and layers of this. And, I think I've kind of hit on maybe 4. So I'll go through them really briefly. But I mean,
yeah.
you could think that this is just about shock value, right? I mean, as we talked about, he's introducing all of this Christian imagery, so let's be blasphemous and get some attention. So I think you could look at it that way. You could also look at it as, the thing about a lot of artists is a lot of them do use Christian imagery in their songs, and they're not necessarily religious. So he could be using that to just drive his point home. Like when he talks about this new world that he wants you to go to and the second coming, and when, according to Christian theology, when Jesus comes back, there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. And he could just be using that. Let me give listeners something that they might be familiar with, since this is a Western Christian nation, to further drive my point home. So that's another interpretation. One is he could be rebelling against organized religion. I mean, he's rebelling a lot against a lot of other societal norms. And it's like, when he says the second coming, anything goes, it almost reminds me of like his messages about partying during the apocalypse. So you could interpret it that way. And then finally, you could say that Prince really had a genuine belief in Jesus. And, I mean, we know he always believed in God. I mean, he thanks God constantly in his liner notes. But, I mean, he could really believe in the second coming of Jesus Christ. And his guitarist at the time, Des Dickerson, he said this in his book, and he said this, at some public events too. It's like he became a born-again Christian on the Dirty Mind tour, and he would talk to Prince about his beliefs. And he, in his eyes, Prince was genuinely trying to be right in God's eyes, but then he also had this rebellious side, and does use the term Dennis the Menace. So, I mean, you could look at it too as like, these are actually Prince's beliefs. He's just incorporating them into this song. So I think, I just wanted to share that, because just to show you like how many layers there are, and we may never know which one he really wanted to get across, but it's just, this is why Prince's music is so fascinating.
Yeah, no, I'm that's why I think you were maybe the perfect person to have on this episode for sexuality, because this is something you've been diving into with your writing, and it's, you're uncovering things that probably a lot of people may not have uncovered, just because it's, like you said, there's a lot going on in the song inherently already. And so to get to those, make those connections, really, you have to be thinking of it from a Christian and religious standpoint to make some of those connections. And the Des point you made is very fascinating, because I knew Des left shortly after 1999, which was the next album, because of some issues that he had with the way the songs that Prince was still writing, and wasn't making the connection personally with some of the actions being taken in the group, and then the lyrics that he would have to sing along with Prince. And but this album in particular, and this song really kind of shows us that there was a lot of, I think, internal struggle within Prince to marry up the two sides of himself, as you mentioned, like the Christian side, the belief in God, his religious side, with just him being a rebel and just being somebody who isn't willing to just kowtow to society's norms, and he wanted to be somebody who could be looked at as an innovator and maybe a rabble rouser to an extent, because that was just in his nature. It just came easy for him because that's just who he was. And the two sides don't always get along, but he tried really hard, especially on this album and in this song, I think.
Yeah, and I always try to think about the power and responsibility artists probably know that they have, especially someone on Prince's level. So it's like, of course, he's thinking about what message am I putting out here? Is this right? Am I putting something out into the world that's going to be negative or positive? And so I try to put myself in his shoes sometimes, because I'm sure he felt great responsibility.
Absolutely. Well, I think we probably covered sexuality to as much as we possibly can, Erica. I thank you very much for joining me and for offering your wonderful insight.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate the opportunity, and look forward to hearing the other guests too.
Yeah, great. Excellent. Thank you very much. You've been listening to the Press Rewind Prince Lyrics podcast. I've been your host, Jason Brenninger. Also my co-host. I wanted to give a big shout out to Erica Thompson. Check out her work at apurpledayindecember.com. If you'd like to get a hold of me for whatever reason, you just wanted to say hi, or just give me some feedback on any of the episodes that I've recorded this far, pressrewind.net would be a good place to start. But I can also be found on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook using the Press Rewind Prince Lyric podcast name. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this episode. I sure enjoyed recording it. And until next time, thank you very much.